Hello. In our previous lecture, we discussed what made the ancient Greeks choose legendary subjects and appropriate meter for Greek tragedies. We also discussed how the chorus became redundant by the time of Euripides. In the present lecture, we shall elaborate upon some other aspects of Greek tragedies. Let us begin with the plot. The tragedies vary so greatly in subject matter that their plots cannot be reduced to a single basic type. Oedipus the King is often taken as a typical play. Actually, this play, having a plot of tragic discovery, is very unusual. The plot of tragic decision is much more frequent and can be reduced to features that are typical of many plays. The traditional tragedy in the times of Aeschylus consisted of the following parts: prologue, which described the situation and set the scene; parodos, which is an ode sung by the chorus as it made its entrance; 5 dramatic scenes, each followed by a komos, that is, an exchange of laments by the chorus and the protagonist; exodus, that is, the climax and the conclusion. Let us first of all talk about the prologue or the prologos. The 2 earlier extant plays of Aeschylus, the Suppliants and the Persians, have no introductory scene or prologos, but begin immediately with the entrance of the chorus or parodos. That was probably the original type of opening. But even the play of Phrynichus, after which Aeschylus modelled his Persians, began with an iambic monologue by one of the characters. Almost all other tragedies begin with an iambic scene, that is, a prologue, which may be either a monologue or a dialogue. Thus, the play, as the iambic meter indicates, begins on a low emotional note. In content, of course, this first scene or prologos is devoted mainly to exposition, but portrayal of character is also often an important consideration, especially in Sophocles. The action of the plot may be initiated during this section. In Oedipus the King, for instance, action begins with the arrival of Creon. The second part is parodos, which follows the prologos. It is marked by the entrance of the chorus, chanting anapaests. They usually begin immediately with their first lyric. This varies in length from 20 to some 200 lines according to the period of the play and to the effect which the poet wishes to produce. In general, the first choral lyric normally gives further expositional background and strikes the proper emotional tone and can be termed as the emotional exposition of the play. After parodos, there is an episode or a section in spoken iambic verse. The first episode is normally concerned with the beginning of the action. and the complication of the plot. This episode is usually followed by another complete choral song, after which, of course, another episode occurs. Thus, the choral songs interrupt the dramatic action and mark off the tragedy into various chapters of the action. The number of these chapters of action varies from play to play. Only that section which comes between whole choral songs is called an episode. Oedipus the King has 6 chapters. The Prologos, 4 episodes, and the Exodus or final section. Eventually, this style became customary. The episodes are artistically constructed, usually as distinct phases of the action. No consistent effort is made to have them end in climax like acts in a modern play. The climax of a Greek tragedy often comes well within a section. For example, the climax at verse 810 in the Bacchae. Still, a special emphasis attaches itself inevitably to the ending of each episode, and the poet is careful to exploit this emphasis by having a significant final note in view of the past action or suggestive of the future. The peripety or the reversal of fortune normally occurs not in the final section of the play, but in the episode preceding the last complete choral song. This gives the chorus an opportunity to comment on the tragedy and allows the play to end on a low emotional pitch befitting finality. The division of the play into episodes sharply marked off by choral songs is sometimes artistically inadvisable. But relief from the monotony of the iambic lines is apparently demanded in all epic drama. And in tragedy, emotional relief from harrowing action is sometimes advisable. In the second half of the Philoctetes, instead of allowing complete choral songs, lyric exchanges between a character and the chorus, or komoi, the singular of which is komos, relieved the monotony of the iambic scenes without interrupting the exciting tension. From the standpoint of dramatic technique, lyric exchanges perform 2 important functions. First, they avoid too sharp a break in the development of an action which the poet wishes to be continuous. Second, they allow a character of the drama to retain the center of the stage rather than yield his position and importance to the chorus. Finally, the section after the last choral song is called the Exodus. 2 characteristic features here are especially noteworthy. The messenger's speech, which may occur in earlier sections of the play, and the Deus ex machina. You know, the messenger first appeared in the Persians of Aeschylus, where he magnificently describes the battle of Salamis. Such an event, obviously, in any theatre must be described rather than portrayed. The awkwardness of changing scene in the Greek theatre, the paucity of actors used, the simplicity of presentation in an open theatre without curtains or shadows, and frequently the indispensability of supernatural phenomena in the legends dramatized made the messenger's speech an extremely important technical device. An artistic raison d'etre also explains the retention of this device throughout Greek tragedy. Dear students, during the 5th century, the Athenians were just awakening to the beauty and utility of rhetorical composition. Many debates in Greek drama reflect this interest. The Athenian audience was predisposed to the sympathetic reception of long, elaborate, and forceful speeches. Indeed, any audience would be enthralled by the description of Salamis by Aeschylus, or the description of the fate of Pentheus in the Bacchae by Euripides. These are certainly masterly compositions. At the end of a Greek tragedy, especially one of Euripides, a divinity may appear. The actor taking this role was brought on, perhaps supported by some mechanical device high above the heads of the chorus and other characters. This deus ex machina, as it is called, may on rare occasion solve a plot that otherwise seems impossible of solution. This is the case in Aristotle by Euripides. In general, the deus ex machina is employed primarily not to bring about or materially affect the solution of the plot, but to produce other effects. Often, the poet wishes to foretell the future of the characters. At times, he wants to point out the relationship between the events of the play and the customs of Attica. These functions can be performed directly only by one with supernatural knowledge. A deity, furthermore, can also explain or interpret the action with an authority far beyond that of the chorus. In plays, divine explanation is of the utmost importance for the theme. Deities can also place the seal of utter finality and divine approval upon the solution of a play. Lastly, the appearance of a deity makes a highly spectacular closing tableau. My dear students, the concern of Aeschylus was with the production of a trilogy and a satyr play, which was a massive work. Thus, these tended to go beyond the technical power of Aeschylus and could not develop into a grand and complex form resembling a modern play in 3 acts. But Sophocles, before the period in which his earliest extant plays were written, abandoned the unwieldy and difficult form of the trilogy and turned all his attention to perfecting the single play. Euripides did likewise. When these 2 men began to produce, other dramatists were still struggling with elementary problems of technique. Even the single play, therefore, offered an ample field for development, and its perfection was obviously the immediate task. For this, they tried to follow the 3 unities of action, time and place as strictly as possible. Friends, unity of action exists when nothing included in the play can be omitted and nothing pertinent to it can be added. It seems to have been the rule of the trilogy as a whole. Each of the 3 plays of extant trilogy of Aeschylus covers a definite phase of the action and so achieves a partial unity of its own. Each play also has its own chorus, but the solution of the first and second plays are solutions only of their immediate problems and obviously lead up to the following play. Definite finality is achieved only in the last play. The first play contains very elaborate exposition. The opening scene of the second play is devoted in part to explaining what has happened in the interval between the first and second plays, because several years have elapsed in between. It also foreshadows the coming action. The third play also has its own exposition, but one group of characters whose fates are closely bound together and one theme are carried through the whole series. There are no minor plots, and the development of the action is essentially simple, precisely as we should expect in the early period of dramatic activity. With such a tradition, it is not surprising that Sophocles and Euripides, turning their efforts to perfecting the individual play, normally maintained strict unity of action. Since a tetralogy and a comedy also, at least in certain periods, seem to have been presented on a single day, the length of each tragedy was necessarily limited. Short as each was, a large portion of it was devoted to choral lyrics. Only 3 actors seem to have been employed in the actual production of a single play. But these conditions were harmonious with the artistic purposes of the poet. Now we come to the unities of time and place. According to Aristotle, endeavors to keep as far as possible within a single circuit of the sun, or something near that. Aeschylus, considerable time passes and the scene changes twice. The intermission between plays facilitated these changes just as the intermission between acts does in the modern theatre. The whole series of 3 plays, furthermore, was of a length adequate for such representation of the passage of time. A single Greek tragedy, passage of time or change of scene was hindered by lack of an intermission and by the short compass of the play. This short compass of time imposed a limitation in the type of plot which could be used in the single play. A single play in which the action covers only a few hours obviously could not deal with development of character. Aristotle insists upon the necessity of consistency and criticizes Iphigenia at Aulis of Euripides, because to him Iphigenia seems one person when she supplicates her father to spare her life, and quite a different person after she has made her heroic decision to die willingly. Certainly, unity of time is not conducive to portraying development of character. The unities of time and place, however, were normally very compatible with the poet's desire for dramatic concentration and with the short and strictly unified action of an individual tragedy. The necessity of allowing intervals for the passage of time during the action is often avoided in Greek tragedy by a device which may be termed double chronology. This was a well-established convention even in the time of Aeschylus. Action which occurs on stage goes forward approximately as the play itself. This action often begins about dawn and is completed by dusk or before. But the action which is supposed to occur off stage is handled with extreme freedom, especially while the choral lyric is being sung. Thus, the Agamemnon of Aeschylus opens before dawn on the night when Troy is being taken, but Agamemnon returns from Troy in the course of the play. Some devices were employed by the dramatists to circumvent the difficulties inherent in the unity of place. The lack of ability to portray an interior scene was made up in part by throwing open the wide doors of the palace or temple, and at times by rolling out a platform with an interior tableau upon it. Another device, even more characteristic of Greek tragedy, is the messenger's speech, by which events which could not conveniently be portrayed are related to the chorus and the audience. Foreknowledge and suspense played important role in Greek tragedy. As it was primarily written on legendary themes, the audience usually had some foreknowledge of the events, and of course, the author had to take this into account while composing his play. The Greek plays are usually self-contained and intelligible to the most uninformed spectator. In order that the whole audience may view the play with precisely the same degree of enlightenment, the Greek poet usually restates the basic facts of the legend as he has accepted it for his current play, and then he constructs the action so as to exploit as fully as possible this foreknowledge. The Greek dramatist had at its disposal means of imparting foreknowledge that our own contemporary dramatists can hardly employ. I mean by using divinities, oracles, and the supernatural. The personal appearance of a god, such as Apollo, in the Alcestis was offensive neither to the believer nor to the skeptic. The believer still regularly consulted oracles, as did practically all Greek states, with the conviction that thus he might discover the will of the gods. On the other hand, the skeptic viewed the divinities of the theatre primarily as poetic abstractions of basic forces of nature. Both for the believer and the skeptic, divinities, oracles, and the supernatural were firmly established by a long and glorious poetic tradition ingrained in the Greek character by the use of the Homeric poems as the basis of all education. For them, the use of such divinities lent an Olympic grandeur and dignity to the play. Irony and surprise are important tools of suspense, and they tend to be mutually exclusive because irony depends on knowledge and surprise on ignorance of the true situation or its outcome. The Greek dramatist in his serious plays almost invariably prefers irony as being the more dignified and the more tragic. The pathetic discrepancy between the intentions which prompt an act and the results of this act, the ironic contrast between man's aspirations and his fate, are considered more worthy of the tragic art than the trickery of uncertainty and surprise. An action can be interpreted profoundly and definitively only in the light of its outcome. In Greek tragedy, there is an absence of violent deeds. In extant tragedy, only 2 suicides occur before the eyes of the audience. That of Ajax in the play of Sophocles and that of Evadne in Suppliants by Euripides. Certain characters who are already ill or wounded, such as Alcestis and Hippolytus, actually expire on stage. But no character ever slays another one before the audience. The explanation for the lack of such violence has been much disputed. It is believed that this lack is primarily due to the small number of actors employed, practical limitations of realistic staging and acting, especially in the early period of tragedy, when the conventions were being formed. The Athenian audience was extremely sensitive to the quality of an actor's voice. Much of the Greek tragedy was sung, and good lyric voices then as now were extremely rare. Still rarer, if we may judge from modern observation, was the combination of a good voice and an ability to act. Since Greek tragedy, in sharp contrast to modern opera, appealed to the intellect as well as to the senses and emotions, it required such combination. Doubtlessly, few individuals could be found to meet the requirements. Here, as elsewhere, furthermore, the Greeks were extremely economical in their use of artistic means. Economy of roles was made possible from the very first by the religious inheritance of the use of masks and by the continuous presence of the chorus. The choral lyrics prevented the scenes from becoming wholly vacant between the exits and the re-entrance of the actor. It allowed him time for change of mask and costume. Masks were made to serve other functions, especially that of revealing something of the identity of the wearer. The characters of tragedy tended to fall into types, such as the old king, for example, Creon in the Medea, the spirited young monarch, as in Oedipus the King, an old nurse and confidant as in the Medea or the Hippolytus and many others. The masks and costumes of such typical characters were so conventionalized that the habitual theatre-goer would immediately recognize them. A shepherd doubtlessly would easily be distinguished from a slave of the household, and probably the mask of a messenger bringing bad news would be distinguished from one bringing good news. A writer of the 2nd century AD describes 28 masks conventionally used in tragedy. Such means of recognition were convenient, especially because the audience had no handbills and had little, if any, information about the play. At the close of the 5th century, after the possibilities of the simple play had been fully exploited, Sophocles, in his Oedipus at Colonus, is obviously chafing at the restriction of using only 3 actors. The last play of Euripides, the Iphigenia at Aulis, is on the verge of demanding another actor. If there had been a genius of the first rank to carry on at this point, and if the defeat and bankruptcy of Athens at this particular moment, the last play of Euripides, the Iphigenia at Aulis, is on the verge of demanding another actor. If there had been a genius of the first rank to carry on at this point, and if the defeat and bankruptcy of Athens at this particular moment had not prevented it, he would have doubtlessly employed a 4th actor and developed a more elaborate drama. Thank you.